Producer, director, storyteller, Tony Reames does it all. From short films, comedies, horror, and music videos for Busta Rhymes, Tony has an impressive resume that is sure to catch your eye. Let's get to know Tony Reames. Tony, how are you?
Great. How are you?
Doing really good. First of all, I was looking at your IMDb page, and I just want to say, whoa, you do
Oh,
so much stuff. I just want to know, how did you get started doing all this stuff and becoming a creative that you are today?
um, well, I guess I started when I was a kid. You know, my dad had a 16 millimeter camera, and so we would shoot some stuff, and then he'd go get it processed, then we'd splice it together, and we'd watch things, and he'd give me some tips and tricks, and then he'd bring home some movies that we'd rent from the video store, and we'd look at stuff, and then he'd tell me things like, "Oh my gosh, this is my favorite movie, and here's why." And at the time, I didn't really understand what some of the stuff he would talk about, such as like one of the early movies, and it was he would bring home this movie called Motel Hell, and it was this horror movie, and to me it was terrifying, but to him, it was like the funniest movie ever. And so I would really try to wrap my head around, like, why is this so funny? Because it's terrifying. I'm like 8, 9 years old, and I couldn't figure out what that was. So it was always about trying to really understand and grasp these concepts that were so foreign to me about these things. And he would explain, it's funny because, and he'd tell me these reasons, and I'm going, no, that's sort of terrifying. But then he would laugh at them. So I was like, okay, I guess it's funny. So, it was sort of that way of sort of getting into it. And it always, led me to these like questions of like, wow, I really like that visually. Why do I like that visually? And then a big part of my life sort of gelled around when Yo MTV Raps came out, which I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was a show that was on MTV. They had Ed Lover and Dr. Dre, and they would two hosts, and they, Fab Five Freddy was the original, and they would sort of bring on these guests, and they would go through like, here's who these guests are, and sometimes they would do some rhymes and stuff like that, but then they would cut to these videos, and you would have these videos that were just raw, and they would be things like just some of the ones I just off the top of my head that I remember, like Twin Hype had this crazy video, and Special Ed had this crazy video, EPMD had this crazy video, and every sort of video built on top of each other. And then when like Michael Jackson released Thriller, that was sort of like the whoa moment of wow, that's something. That was the first time I really recall cinema and music video, colliding.
Yeah.
And so that was sort of like my start. And, I'm just a fan of, film, music videos. So that was sort of what led me down this path,
Yeah. And for me, I love seeing how you're able to bounce around from two different genres of cinema and storytelling. Between music videos and films, what's your favorite style to direct and create the most?
I like comedy the most, right? So I always like it when I would see comedy done well. And there's a couple videos, like music videos and films, that do it right. But I'm not a huge fan of like straight comedy unless it's like something that I'm just like Ace Ventura Pet Detective blew me away. Like when I saw it, like I thought that was the funniest thing. Christmas Vacation, I think, is the funniest thing. But then, I like when they mix elements. So for example, I remember a Third Base video where they bring in Gilbert Gottfried, and and he would do these intros, and they would intercut with him throughout the video, and that was always funny to me. And then another video that just really makes me laugh, it's one moment, and Redman has this video called "I'll Be Dad," and it's like this video, right? It's a typical music video. In the middle of it, he's doing like yoga or fitness instruction, and he does this super high kick, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And like I must have watched that video like 1,000 times just for that scene. And it's sort of like when you mix like these two things that I guess are at odds with each other. So that's what really draws me to like horror comedy, action comedy.
Yeah.
Going to be good, right? Because you're going to get that perfect mix of like this real like high stakes action, and then like that right at the the pinnacle of the action, then boom, Kevin Hart or someone will drop this ridiculous, Ryan Reynolds will say something that's completely insane, and you're like, yeah, that's
yeah. And like really, I feel like the best comedy is the comedy that just comes completely out of nowhere and just ruins the emotion that they were building up, and you're just like,
I love that. I
I
love
love
that.
that. Yes. Um, I know the most recent project that you had was Playtime's Over, and I actually want to talk about that. Like, what was the inspiration behind the film, the short Playtime's Over? Like, I want to know because it's a mix of comedy as well as LL's horror and dark elements.
Right. So, my daughter and I, Evan, have made like a bunch of short films, and we do one every year. We'll make a new short film. And as she's gotten older, we started when she was about 3, and we've just sort of progressed. And we've gotten better, and the themes have gotten a little bit more elevated. And then I was at there's a horror film festival called Buried Alive, and they do this thing called the Cinema Challenge. And basically, the way that works is, I'll probably get some of it wrong, but basically you get like a couple of things, like you'll get a prop and a line of dialogue and then a theme. So you might get like slasher movie, candlestick, and you've got to say the line, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, or whatever, And so then often you have a week or whatever to make a short film, right? And so this would have been, man, I'll get the year wrong, maybe 4 years ago. I happened to be at the Cinema Challenge. I didn't have anything in it, but I was just there to just support. I had a bunch of friends who were, a part of it, and the guys that run it.
Yeah.
And there was this one film called Girls Against Humanity that my buddy Joe did, and there were 2 actresses in it. One was Haley Leary, and the other was Sydney Weiss. And you can look them both up. They're both doing great things. But anyway, so I saw both 2 actors, and I thought, wow, they're really great,
Yeah.
So afterwards, I went up to Joe, and I said, hey, Joe, can you tell me more about these 2 actors? Because I really thought they were great. And he's like, oh, they're great, da-da-da. And so he introduced me to Haley. And then Haley, I'm not sure if she had seen anything that I'd done or not, but she was like, hey, I would love to work with you and your daughter. And so I was like, okay, great. So Haley and I and Evan got together, and we were just sort of brainstorming some ideas, and we each came to the table with some ideas. And Haley said, what if we did like a babysitter story, right? And we did, a sort of like 2 of these things meet. You've got the child and you've got the babysitter. And we started fleshing that out, and it was like, okay, and what if the child, because usually in these situations, the babysitter is the bad guy, right?
Yeah.
That's sort of the typical trope. We flipped it, and we're like, what if the child was sort of the threatening one, and she was into horror, and she was going to be the one that was going to terrorize the babysitter, right? It'd be fun. And so then it became a list of like, okay, well, what would she do? And so then Haley said, well, I've got this friend named Todd Jacobs, who's a really good writer, and I sort of want to introduce you to him. So we brought Todd in, and Todd's great. And so then all of us got together, and we really started just vibing on ideas. And then it came down to, well, let's get these set pieces and these moments, and let's see how we can string these pieces together from all these classic movies and see what we can do, right? And so we sort of went away, and we all sort of started throwing in our favorite, like, here's my favorite scene from a movie, or here's my favorite movie. And it was like, and then it was Todd's job of sort of stringing those together in a through line of the plot. So all that to say, my daughter, Evan, who at the time I think was 10 or 11, hates movies, hates them. She's terrified of them, right? So her only thought was, well, I hate babysitters. Like, I'm not a fan of babysitting. I don't like babysitters. So I don't have any thoughts on the movies, but I can tell you that I don't like babysitters. So well, good, you just sort of harness that, right?
Yeah.
Then we'll sort of wrap the stories around it based on all of these movies. So I came to the table with, 30 movies or scenes from movies. Haley came with a bunch, Todd came with a bunch, and we sort of picked our favorites. And then came this like Venn diagram of where everything meets. And then Todd wove all that together, and that's sort of how Playtime's Over came to be.
I love the collaboration aspect of the project, how you were like, as things were progressing, you're like, well, do you have an idea? Like, yeah. And I want to go back and talk about how you and your daughter have been making short films every single year. How was that? What was the inspiration behind doing that? And how has that been each year? How does that keep progressing for you?
So, well, it's funny because We started when she was actually before she could even speak. So she didn't actually start speaking until she was 3. So everything with her was sign language. Everything was visual. And she was just slow to sort of adapt to like communication. And so I thought, well, maybe if we get some visual stuff going, we can, sort of wrap that up. And, because at the time we thought she may never talk. She just might be into sign language and visual communication. So I thought, well, that's film. That's what it is. So we really started working on that. And as we started doing that, like the first one we did was, I said to Evan, I said, the first thing we should do is let's try and scare mommy. And she's like, okay, great. So we made like a Halloween short. Mm-hmm. And there's this thing called The Closet. It was a little, like maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes long and it was freestyle. It was just Evan. I put the camera on and I said, here, we're going to start. I said, here's your starting point and here's the ending point. I said, everything else, I said, let's just see what happens. And so all of the dialogue, all of the action beats, it's all her, right? And she started sort of getting into it and it sort of opened her up. And so that was like the first one. And I remember that I wasn't really into like sending these off. These were just things we did for fun. And we sent it off to a couple short films. I really didn't know too much about short films, but I sent it off to a couple short films and we got some really great feedback. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, that little girl is amazing, right? And I was like, oh, wow. So I would respond. I was like, thank you. That's my daughter. We're just having fun, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that kind of like inspired her. So every year we would make these. And before that was the first one we actually put out into the world. The rest we had done just for ourselves. So we had 30 to 40 that just she and I had made it and showed mommy and grandma. And we just sent them to family. But after that, I was like, oh, maybe we're onto something fun here. So every year we would do one and they would get some, people eyeballs on them and some great. Mm-hmm. And as it progressed, she was getting better and better.
Yeah.
So when we did Playtime's Over, we got a really good response from like, wow, the ladies in that, because it's basically Haley versus Evan in the whole thing. That's basically they're the leads, and that's all you mm-hmm. pretty much see. And Haley's a phenomenal actor. That's just just a given. Like I'm like a huge fan of Haley, and she's gonna go far. So that's not even a question. But I think what she did was she brought Evan out, right? She brought her up to that, like, okay, Evan saw like, wow, she's a really good actor. And so that gave Evan some like, oh, I see how this works, sort of some like tutelage of like, oh, the wheels are spinning. Mm-hmm. So we did that. And when you finish it, I don't know, I'm sure everyone feels like this, but you're sort of, too close to it. So when I finished it, I said to my wife, I was like, I don't even know if this is any good. Right, I'm not even sure. Like, mm-hmm. My wife's like, "Oh, it's gonna do fine." And so we started submitting it, and we got really, tremendous feedback.
Yeah.
And so, as it would go, and we would get, we'd win awards, and we go to film festivals, and we do all these things, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just sort of like, we're snowballing here, and we're really starting to see things. And I thought, and Evan had started taking classes for drama. And she was doing more at school with her. They do the morning news and she like heads that up and it's a video broadcast and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, oh, we're really onto something here. And at one point, this would have been probably around Christmas last year. She's like, not really into acting. And I was like, okay. I said, so do you not want to make these anymore? She's like, no, I want to make them, but I want to be behind the camera and I want to do more behind the scenes. And I was like, great. So now she's shifting from, she wants to go more behind the scenes and do more editing and more camera op and stuff like that. Mm. And my younger daughter, Quinn, is now stepping up to say, I'll fill that role. She wants to jump in and she wants to act. So it's just this interesting progression of creativity, because the last thing I want to do, I don't want to force any of the kids to do anything they don't want to do in terms of like that. Because that's not it just needs to be a healthy, fun spot to do things, right? And so when I noticed that Evan was like, I'm sort of done with the acting, I want to get more behind the scenes, I'm great. Unfortunately, she's a pretty good actor, so we're losing from there. But then Quinn was like, okay, well, I'll jump in, So it's just interesting to see that progression from like, she wanted to try it, she realized she could do it, she got better at it, she got to with someone who was really good at it, and she's like, okay, now I see what it takes. And then she did it, and then it was like, cool, I've done it. Now I want to see the other side of it. So it's just been an interesting progression along the way.
And sounds like they get the creativity from you because you're creative all over the place. Is there a reason why like you're able to blend? We say from your background with you and your father thinking horror movies were hilarious. You're able to blend horror and comedy very well. And that's like kind of like that's like one of your niches. I know. I think I saw it was Y2K.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
I remember. Hilarious. And I was like, that could be really horrifying, but also now it's kind of funny.
Right.
What was the inspiration behind that film?
So that one's not out yet, and that I'm glad you got to see that because that one's shopping right now, and that's gonna be, I think that could be a lot of fun. It's funny, I saw this interview with Jim Carrey, and I guess I don't know him. I don't know anyone. I don't think I know anyone that even knows him. But from this interview, it seemed like he had a really like troubled past in terms of like a lot of tragedy in his life. And that was one thing that I sort of really gravitated to was, in my life anyway, we've had a lot of tragedy. And I'm sure it's just like most people, right? You go through a lot of really hard times and really, setbacks and bad things happen. And it's sort of, that's been my sort of go-to, and sometimes to a fault where like I'll have to kind of like laugh at something or find something humorous. So for example, like my dad died when I was really young, right? Which happens to a lot of people. But I think the only way that I could even remotely deal with it was through humor, And it was something I think because my dad went through a lot. My dad had 2 heart transplants. So there was a lot of like medical issues going through our lives from the time I was just a kid all the way up until he passed. And so I think that was something I learned from him and from my mom was that, and I hate to say it, but sometimes life sucks, right? There's just no 2 ways about it. But you got to be able to find the comedy or find. So for me anyway, as I've gotten older, I've sort of been able to process this a lot better. I don't like vicious horror. I don't like horror for the sake of horror, blood for the sake of blood, or revenge horror, or anything like that if it can't be tied to moments of levity or some cause or some reason or some answer to it, because I think life has too many situations that are unanswered, right? So for me, I think horror comedy is that perfect blend of, this is way out there and this might be bloody and violent, but at the same time, I think they're going to give you that piece of levity of like, oh yeah, but they slipped on all that blood and they knocked themselves out, right? So then I can go, right, that's exactly what would happen to me, So I guess in all that to say, without the extreme horror, there has to be some sort of extreme comedy to blend. I can't deal with the extremes on either side. I have to have sort of a balance. I guess anything.
I haven't seen the movie yet. I saw the trailer, and that's what made me really excited. I was like, this looks really funny. I wanted to talk about your past experience and one in music producing for music videos. How was it like? I saw the music video for Arrested Development, and when directing those type of music videos, what's your creative process in getting started with it, as well as working with the artists and helping their vision come to life?
That's a great question. Well, first of all, as far as music, I'm very like siloed. Like I know hip hop. That's all I know. I don't know rock. I don't know country. I know a little R&B, maybe. Like, is it only if it'll feature someone in hip hop? I mean, that's about all I know about any other forms of music. But in terms of hip hop, I've been listening to that since like 83, 84. And hardcore, that's all I listened to. So I sort of came up in that hip hop space, like I said, with the Yo MTV raps and things like that. So my visual dictionary of things is really predicated on those hip hop videos, or especially early hip hop videos. Like nowadays, I can see something and I can say, wow, that's really good, right? It's not my thing. I wouldn't make that, but it's really good. But I always go back to, like I talked about, the earlier videos. So for example, Arrested Development, I grew up with you know, Tennessee, Mr. Wendell, those videos, right? And those are huge videos, and not just for the, even, you know, Revolution, some of their other videos that you'll see, Ease My Mind, you know, it's, the songs are great, but I always love it when you have a song that's great and you have a video that either complements that greatness or even takes that greatness to a different plane.
Yes.
And for example, I really think Tennessee, the music video, did that. You know, it was black and white, it was progressive, it was something you hadn't seen in hip hop, because usually hip hop was, music videos were very urban. So you would see these cityscapes and you would see all these, you know, intense city scenes. And Tennessee was this black and white music video, and it looked like it was on a farm. And then, you know, it ended with like this painting of a lynching that they couldn't even show on MTV. And so there was like this whole other world that they brought to it, this whole other artistic space. And so when I was lucky enough to do Living, the music video with Arrested Development, which is the first video, they were in a different phase. They had gone from the early times, and now we were into like 2010, 2011. So they were older. I don't want to say wiser, because they've always been, you know, wise and conscious and doing speeches, been always doing these things. So wise beyond his years. But I think he was a little more, I don't even know what the right word is, adept at sort of the industry and the music and his thoughts and how he wanted things. And so we met with him, and then there was a lot of breakdown, and it's the exact same collaboration. Like, that's my favorite part, is I'll pitch some things to speech. I said I would love to do, because I noticed that their newer videos were more contemporary looking. And I said, I love that. I love that you've got contemporary, but I'd love to still have elements from that original era that sort of like defines you. I said, not to go back, and I don't necessarily want to shoot the whole thing in black and white or do anything even remotely like that. But I'd love to, like, you know, sort of merge the two worlds and see what we could do. And he loved that. And then he brought some ideas. He's like, we could do this piece here, and we could do this piece here, and put them together. And I just remember that when we filmed it, it was very cold. It was, I think it was February or March, and it was freezing outside. And we were all
looked cold. It looked really cold.
Yeah. And if you look, a funny little anecdote that I don't even know if anyone's ever said or it's ever been, you know, told, but there's a shot where Tasha, who has the red hair, and she's in the field and she's singing the chorus. And if you look, that she's sitting up against a tree, and in the background there's all this field, this giant cornfield. Well, that cornfield is now Pinewood Studios, where they film all the Marvel movies. So they've torn all that out, and that entire area right now, that's where they shot Black Panther and Captain America and Iron Man 3, or I think Iron Man 3, but all the recent Marvel movies that they shot in Atlanta, those were all shot in that field right there.
Oh gosh, you got it before they did.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yep.
That's just amazing, and all the different areas of the industry that you've been able to play around in, as well as really thrive in. COVID-19 has been harsh on everybody. Has that affected you and your family? Has it affected productions? How have you been managing it?
It's been really bad. It's been tough. I know in Atlanta so a lot of my friends are in the industry, so I'll just I try to keep in touch with them to say, like, how is it going? What are we trying to do? A friend of mine, Jenna Cannell, sent out this document that was really great on here's some COVID-19 set preparedness. It was great to here's some things that you should do. Here's some things you should think about. They're all like fantastic. I have to be especially careful just myself because I was born with one lung. So I'm like extreme high risk on if I catch it. So everything I have to do has to be really safe. So we were actually about to start filming a short film with Haley again in end of March, and we've had to push it, and we haven't been able to get back to it just because I check in with everybody and try to figure out, like, are we safe? Is this something we can do? How do we do it? What's the best way? And I think, man, it's near impossible because you're talking about filmmaking is a very communal thing, and people are close. People are in each other's spaces, especially actors. And how do you do that safely? How do you manage that? And you can't, that's the one thing about like you can do everything safety wise for the crew, but if you can't get authentic performances out of the actors because they have to be 6 feet apart and they have to wear masks, I mean, there's just, I don't know, there's too many questions. And so, yeah, man, it's been, I know every industry's hit hard. I know that, but I would say that the entertainment industry is just, I mean, we're suffering. I don't know what you can do. And I certainly don't have any answers at this point.
Mm. There was short film by Zendaya. She was the executive producer. Like they produced it. They quarantined for like 14 days. All the actors and actresses, all the crew, and then like there was a chef that like had to prepare everything by hand. And,
I
like,
love it.
It's insane because like there's so much you have to do. I think Tyler Perry built like a tiny home community for one of the productions. Like kept everyone isolated for 14 days. Like only 3 people out of like 200 got COVID, but then they isolated and then they start. And there's so much you have to do now to make it happen. So you can have that community because it's so vital to the production process. And I'm so sorry that like you have to halt productions on this. But when COVID's over, when everything gets back to normal, what is the next project that you'll be working on? Are you able to announce that? What do we have for the future of Tony Reames?
I have a couple projects, a couple music videos. I'm not sure if I sent them to you, but they're definitely not out yet. That are done. I have probably 3 music videos that are done. 2 are completely done. One has maybe one more scene to do, so that we've been trying to do in the whole. It was supposed to be released this summer.
Yeah.
And it was a music video with Redman, and because of COVID, it's just been this trying to get. We got like one more scene. He called me and he was like, "Hey, I got this idea." Just and he pitched this idea and I was like, oh my gosh, that's hilarious. Like his sense of humor is next level. So that was one thing we need to film still, so hopefully we can get that knocked out. That would be one of the first things we do. We have the Dead by Midnight Y2 Kill, which is completed. It hasn't even been announced yet. We're trying to get distribution for it. We could even do that during COVID because it's totally done. That gets out there, because that would be something I would really like to get out, especially now, because it would be a good time to get out. You could streaming, whatever, you could see it. It's funny, it's horror, But then the first production, I have 2 things that I'm working on right now. One was the short film with Haley, and it's definitely not a follow-up to Playtime's Over. It's I don't even know how. It's something new for all of us. It'll definitely have some, I'll say it's comedy, but it's stakes are way higher on it. And it was pitched by a buddy of mine who said, hey, I have this idea. And he pitched it to me. I was like, that's insane. I said, we need to do that. So that'd be the first thing I do. It's called What Did You Say? It's about all I have right now on it, because we haven't been able to film anything.
I want to know more, but I don't want to pry too much out of you because you keep those secrets,
Oh, it's offline. I'll send you the lookbook for it.
Yes. I get the exclusive. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Tony.
Then the other thing is, and this is something that I thought was funny, was, so I grew up in this town in Western Pennsylvania, and a small, tiny town. It's a blue-collar town, hardworking, great people, right? But it's also, and it's south of Erie, Pennsylvania. So, and it's got this, I don't want to say a curse, but the more I talk about it, the more I'm like, my God, every year something horrific happens to someone or something in the town. And it's been like that for decades. And so I was talking to a buddy of mine, and I was like, hey, we were talking about next ideas and things we could work on. And I was telling him, I said, hey, I want to run all these stories by you. And so I just keep feeding him these stories. And he's like, this is crazy. Because I thought, maybe that's just what happens in a small town. Everyone's in everyone's business. All these things happen. But no, I guess it's kind of wild. So just based on all these real things that happened, I just fed him like, here's my version of it. And I fed it all to him. And so he went off and he wrote a script for it. And I said, I want to do something scary. Like I've never done anything that's scary. I don't want it to be vicious. I don't want it to be like, I'm not a fan of torture porn or anything like kind of horror. But I like scary. Like I like suspenseful. Like here's a good example. Like I don't like the Conjuring movies at all, and I know that's controversial to say, but
I
I
get you.
I love the Conjuring trailers. Like I think their trailers are better
Okay.
than movies. And
Yeah.
so I said, if we could make something as scary as the Conjuring trailer, I think we're onto something.
Mm-hmm.
And so he went off and he wrote something, and so we're going to work on that. And the goal is, I haven't even told Haley about this or anybody about this, but I want to go next year to Pennsylvania and I want to shoot this feature. And I want it to be, it's going to be really low budget. It's going to be grimy. It's going to be straight suspense and horror, and it's a ghost story.
Yeah.
So that's my goal. Those are my two big things. I don't know if when or how or if any of that'll happen, but Greenville, Pennsylvania, you're next we're going to try to do a horror movie.
Perfect. I'm so excited for that. Like I'm gonna be watching the entire time, like watching your story, see how these progress. I hope it can happen soon. We'll see how the world works. But Tony, I just want to say thank you so much for this interview. It's been awesome. You're great. Thank you so much for taking the time out to meet with the Collection Maze. It means a lot. I'll let you go now. Get back to all the work that you're doing. Tony, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the time, and thank you for everything you do.